Fantastic to have Joan Wright-Howie, who is one of my colleagues. Fantastic to have you, Joan. And you shared with me a story that I thought was really pertinent for the time that we are facing at the moment, because what you're just about to share with us gives us pointers into the future of Christian community if we are brave enough to step into new possibilities and connecting with different people in different ways. So did you want to say something about the Celtic festival that you recently conducted a workshop in?
Yes, thanks, Matt. It's great to be here and nice to be able to communicate with a whole bunch of people who are listening in. Every year in Port Arlington, there's a National Celtic Festival is held, and the Port Arlington Uniting Church is one of the venues where some of the material is presented. So they run workshops in the church hall and in the church, and also musicians will play in the church as part of the festival. Other churches in Port Arlington also participate, and they use local church halls and community centres and put up a great big marquee, and thousands of people flock on Port Arlington to join in the folk festival.
So seriously, thousands of people.
Yeah, it's a huge festival with people coming from all over the country and loads of people, musicians presenting, as well as people who are anything to do with Celtic stuff. They have Celtic dancers of all sorts coming from all around Australia, and also there was the Irish dancers of New Zealand were there as well. And then there's pipe bands everywhere, so you just walk around and all of a sudden the pipe band will pop up over the hill and blast their way past you. And they even have hurling. Apparently that's a Celtic tradition of hurling objects as far as you possibly can. So all things Celtic happen in Port Arlington at the Celtic Festival. And the Uniting Church every year, as they participate, the Sunday morning worship theme is Celtic Spirituality. And each year they've invited somebody to come and be a guest preacher. So the Minister Karen invited me this year to be the guest preacher. And so I said, yep, sure, I'd like to come along. Came with a ticket to the Celtic Festival, so that was pretty nice. And so I was involved with planning the worship service with a group of people there. And they spoke to the Celtic Festival coordinator, Una, about what I was planning to talk about in the church service. And she said, you know what, I think we need a Celtic spirituality workshop on as part of the festival as well, because they're trying to sort of diversify and not just have music and other things, but wanting to think more about other types of workshops that they can run. And we're interested in this idea of spirituality and Celtic spirituality as part of that.
That's fantastic. So it's based upon the relationship that the Port Arlington Uniting Church already has with the broader festival. And I noticed on their website that they've been running now for 20 years. This is the 20th year they've actually held it.
That's right.
So when there was a sharing of what's going to happen in the worship service that you were leading, the invitation was then extended to actually offer a workshop. Now, did the workshop happen at a different time?
Yes, yeah. So the worship service was on the Sunday morning, and the workshop was held on the Sunday afternoon as part of a series of workshops that were going on across the afternoon. The people could learn a variety of different skills and things.
And was that, whereabouts was it held? Was it held in the hall, or I'm assuming it didn't?
So the workshop was held in the same place in the church, in the Port Arlington Uniting Church.
Now, I'm just going to read what it says on the website that you were going to be offering, Joan. Exploring Celtic Spirituality, Sensing Sacred Presence, Joan Wright-Howie. Down the ages, Celtic people have fostered awareness of divine presence in the midst of everyday life, not burdened by the dualism of modern Western thinking. Celtic spirituality invites no separation. The source of life permeates earth, creatures, stars, and folk who walk on two legs. This workshop will create space to explore the nature of spirituality and gifts and insights from Celtic wisdom. Come along as Joan shares stories of her own senses of Anamkara, I'm sure I didn't get that right, soul friendship, and invites you to connect with yours.
Yes, that's what I
said. So that was the blurb.
There's the blurb.
So here's the question. Did anybody come?
Well, I didn't think terribly many people would come, to be honest, Matt.
Yep.
I wrote that blurb hoping that people would come. I went to the workshop prior to mine, which was on storytelling, and there were about 15 people there. So I put out 15 chairs in a circle and thought that's what I was hoping the chairs would all
You
be
were you were hoping you were hoping that you weren't going to have a whole bunch of empty
empty
chairs.
chairs. No, and as the time came, the program sort of puts 15 minutes in between each of the workshops, and by the time I was ready to start, the entire space was filled with 70 people. All the chairs were taken up.
Fantastic.
So it was an incredible surprise to be surrounded by so many people, and I had to sort of do a bit of a pivot on what I was planning to do. Rather than this nice intimate discussion with a small group, it turned out to be something that was a workshop with a large group of people who were all present and eager to explore Celtic spirituality.
So you'd prepared, thinking possibly 15, seeing as there were 15 at the last workshop, and then 70 people have come along. Under the banner of spirituality, like explore spirituality. Yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. So, and then what did you do with those people in the workshop?
Yeah, so during the workshop, I started off by really asking the question, why is it that so many Australians here in Australia would be interested in Celtic spirituality when we're the countries of the Celts is in Europe. And I'd done a little bit of research, obviously, in preparation for the workshop, and discovered, of course, that the Celts are the Indigenous people of Europe who were often persecuted and pushed to the margins. And Celtic tribes predate Christianity, and they moved throughout Europe and ended up kind of moving further and further across into the sort of western side of Europe, and were even further displaced by the English, in the Irish Celts and the Scottish, who ended up having to leave their lands and come to countries like America and Australia. So a lot of the early settlers to Australia have these Celtic origins and of people who've been displaced. And so I talked a bit about that, and in terms of acknowledging Australia and acknowledging country at the start of our time, I said, well, I wonder whether we are really interested in Celtic spirituality as Australians, because, we're being displaced from our country. And so as we begin with an acknowledgement of country and the Indigenous people of Australia, perhaps that helps us understand what Indigenous Australians are talking about in relation to connection with country, because I think lots of people come to the Celtic Festival with a spiritual longing for connection, connection with place, space, and the music and the dancing and all things Celtic help us to remember as settler Australians that we have roots in another country, in another place. And it's interesting that displaced people from another country have come to Australia and end up displacing the Indigenous communities here. So that seemed to be something that really, really resonated for a lot of people. There was lots and lots of nodding. Yeah, why are we here? Why are we at a Celtics festival? Why do we love this so much? Because it stirs something in us about our spiritual longing for a home place. So that was a really good place to start. And I felt like people were really with me in that. And then I spoke a bit about this longing for Anam Cara, which is soul friend. In the Gaelic, it's this desire for a place of soul connection. And in the Gaelic the Celtic spirituality, we sometimes talk about there's sort of 3 dimensions of awareness. There's the Kirion, which is the tangible stuff that we can see and touch and feel, all the things that are the physical world. But there's also these places of altar, which are those sacred places. And the Celts sometimes talk about thin places where the veil between this world and the world beyond is very thin. You may have encountered thin places yourself.
Yes.
From time to time. And then there's this 3rd dimension, which is the Neat, the beyond space, or the no thing. And that space is like that kind of entering into the realm of not knowing, in the beyondness. And there is a deep longing, I think, in human beings to know the tangible, but also to be in places of altar, and then to know that there is something in the no thing, in the beyond, where we sense ourselves part of something beyond ourselves.
So this is about mystery.
Yeah. this desire for relationship with a source beyond the self. So I talked a little bit about spirituality being this journey of our inner life, and the religious traditions have developed to support the journey of the inner life and to support our meaning making, sense of purpose and identity and connection with ourself, with creation, with country, and with this divine presence. And the Christian framework's got a whole lot of resources to attend to that, but as do many other religious traditions. And I think that was a really helpful way for people to come into the conversation who might be a bit nervous or skeptical about Christianity or have Christian roots, but not quite sure that they want to be part of religious systems, to be able to say, well, actually, spirituality is something that's sort of fundamental to all of us. And then religious systems are designed to help us to have frames of reference and rituals and so on, which support us in that connection into, we were in an altar place in the church, which is seeking to be that sort of sacred thin place. But there are lots of those out in the world all over. And I actually said, I think that a lot of the music creates thin places, because the Celtics, the music that we were listening to, a lot of it's absolutely beautiful and creates a really sacred environment for people to connect into.
Now, there's a connection with the painting that's behind you. So did you actually take that with you?
Yeah, so this is a picture that I brought with me into the workshop, and the story that I told of my own searching for the Celtic spirituality was of a time that I actually drew this picture of the story. So it's a picture of looking down into a well. I was at a conference in Ireland in 2019 on spirituality in a workplace context, and at the end of the conference, I had a car that I needed to drive back to the airport. So I thought I'd go in search of St. Bridget, who I'd heard about during the conference. And so I took off with my car and looked for St. Bridget's Well. And there's these little signposts along the road that take you, the brown signs like there are in Australia, to historic and sacred places. So I followed the sign to St. Bridget's Well. It's actually in Kildare, in between race courses. So there's these big horse race tracks, and you follow down a little track between the race courses and eventually get to a place which is where St. Bridget's Well is said to be. I have since discovered that there are many locations of St. Bridget's Well all over Ireland, but anyway, that beside the point. So as I got out of my car, it was raining, and I had my raincoat on, and I walked across to a statue of St. Bridget, and then under an arch where people had tied up a whole lot of little trinkets and tokens of prayer. And I walked down a pathway toward the well, and there were 5 standing stones leading up as we got closer to the well. And as I walked past those stones, I just sort of felt in the air a prayer that I felt like had been prayed in that place over years and years and years and years. And it wasn't a prayer out of my tradition, the Uniting Church tradition. It was a prayer from the Catholic tradition. It was a Hail Mary prayer. And I just could hear it being echoed around, and I started to pray it myself. So as I walked closer to the well, I started uttering sort of just under my breath, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us now and at the hour of our death. Amen. I just prayed that prayer over and over, and I walked around the well. I just found myself going with what I felt like I should do, and walked around the well and around the well and around the well, and then came to a stop and looked across into the well. And this is the image that I saw as I looked into the well, with the raindrops just dripping down onto the water. And I could see this figure looking back at me. And I wondered whether that figure might have been an ancient druid or an ancient version of St. Bridget looking back up at me. And I found in that moment that I was absolutely in a thin place, where I felt that kind of leaning across toward that the neot, the beyondness. And so I suppose for me, that story was a description of experiencing something of the altar and the thin space within my own connection with place and country. But I was wanting to find out more about St. Bridget, so I went from the well to and I was telling this story to the people at the workshop. to the St. Brigidine Monastery, which was just down the road. And I met one of the sisters there who showed me around the building. And it's a beautiful modern new building. And at the heart of the building, there's another well. It's a well of light. And so they've got a circular space in the middle of the building with a garden in it, with this light streaming down into the center of the building with glass walls all around it. And the sister I was talking to walked me around and around this well of light. And we had a beautiful conversation about St. Bridget and the work of the Brigidines in the world today. And then I said to the sister, I'd like to go up to see St. Bridget's church, which is in Kildare. And she said, oh, you better get on, because the church will close at 5 o'clock. And I think it was 4:30 or something like that. And I had a bit of a drive to get there. So I hopped in the car and I drove again. And unfortunately, I missed the turn off till Kildare and ended up driving around a big triangle to get back. But as I was driving down this road, I saw another one of those brown signs going down into a glen. And I had this strong sense of yearning that I should go down into the glen. But I didn't, because I wanted to get to the church. So I kept driving round the triangle, eventually got to Kildare and found my way to St. Bridget's Church and arrived right on 5 o'clock as the gates were closing. And out from the cottage right next door to the church gate came an old crone who said to me, oh, you can't get in there. You'll have to come back tomorrow. It's closed. And I said, oh, I'm going back to the airport, so I won't be able to. And she said, well, it's just too bad then. And I felt this strong sense of inhospitableness in that space, and in comparison to the space out at the well and at the monastery, quite a different kind of, I don't know what it was. It was
welcome. It was a different welcome.
A different sort of welcome. It was no welcome. Anyway, so I hopped in my car, drove to the airport, got on the aeroplane. And as I was sitting in the aeroplane reflecting back on my experience of seeking St. Bridget, I prayed a prayer as we were flying through the sky. And I said, sorry to St. Bridget and sorry to God, because I didn't go down the path to the glen. I really regretted it. And I felt like I should have gone down that path. And so I realized that I could actually do that in my imagination, sitting in the aeroplane. So I told this story to the group at the workshop. And I invited them to come with me in their imagination to go down into the glen. So I invited them to close their eyes and just imagine that we were going down the path, or down the road into the glen, and said that, I found my way there and got out of the car and walked in amongst the trees, and the dappled light was coming through the trees, and there was an open area between where that was grassy, and I invited them just to, in their own imaginations, find that place, that sacred place for themselves. And then we kind of entered into a silence in the workshop where people really dropped down. I could feel it in the room, just dropping down into this sacred place of presentness. And it was like we were all 70 of us in that room, were in a sacred holding space together. It was extraordinary. And I kind of felt my whole body kind of tingling as we were all there. It felt similar to what I felt like on the airplane and at this well, like we were in a sacred place.
And would you say that this was a communal experience? So this was...
Yeah, it felt like there was a stillness in the room where everyone, sometimes the Quakers talk about dropping into silence. That's what it felt like. We just, all of us dropped down into this silence together. Yeah. And I felt like I was on sacred ground as a person holding.
Well, you were sharing this moment together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, gently and slowly, as after a period of time, invited people to become back aware to being in the room together, and asked a few folks to just share what that was like, which is a bit risky in a way with a group that large, but yeah. Extraordinarily enough, there were a few people who were willing to speak into the whole group of what that experience was like. And I suppose my eyes met one young woman's eyes, and I asked her, would you be willing to share what that was like? And she just said, oh, it just felt so real and so connected. Felt like I was really there. And then another person that just spoke with tears in her eyes and said, I can't believe I'm in this church space. I've just been feeling really, really on the edge of tears the whole time we've been here. Other people spoke about
So in terms of that person there talking about being on the edge of tears, was it because she was inside a church and it was something about the architecture and the aura of the space, or was it something to do with the Celtic? Like, were you able to discover what that was about or not?
Yeah, well, after I'd invited a few people to share into the whole group, I asked people to go into pairs and just talk with each other. And
Yep.
That particular woman told the story of that she and her friend, she's a musician, and that she and her friends have been trying to craft music just from listening to their impulse, listening to their spiritual awareness of music and where it was coming from. And she said she could not believe that she was in a church with all these old people or older people who actually were talking about spirituality and some of the stuff that her friends were talking about. So for her, there was something quite extraordinary about finding spiritual connection in a church. It was a surprise to her. I think she probably imagined that the kind of welcome she'd get at a church would be a bit more like my old crone at the door of St. Bridget's Church. And yet she came in and found herself in a place that was more like the glade and the well.
And more like what she was longing for.
Yeah. And she was really expressing surprise in finding it as well, which was surprise to me. But yeah. So, but
surprise to you because you have found that.
That's right. And I'm going
church spaces. So yeah.
Where am I holding space in churches? The sort of space that people are longing for, deeply longing for. And they don't know they kind of don't even know what we're doing or wouldn't expect to find it in the Christian context.
Yep.
Yeah. So it was a great example, I think, Matt, of the I mean, I didn't do anything wildly special or clever. I just was myself. And there's
so
offering things out of our tradition that are present and available to all of us in ministry.
Yeah, but you were holding a space and crafting this collective communal experience.
Yeah.
So there is something about curating the space though and holding that, which I imagine that you are gifted at more so than some other people. Let's put it that way, because it's a gift that you have, and that you're passionate about this stuff as well. So it does reflect some of your unique abilities. One of the things I'm really interested though is what do you think this points to about if there are these people around who have these longings, and within our tradition and within our spaces, there is a possibility to connect with these people and provide the space. What do you think it points to about how we need to be community and providing spaces into the future, particularly now recognizing that so many people are not expecting to find it within a church and not expecting to find it within a church community?
That's a really good question. And I think the first answer is we've got to step out of the churches, and I feel like my story about what I discovered when I was in Ireland, that it wasn't in the church buildings. They were closed. The place of connectivity was out in the landscape. And well, certainly was for me in terms of finding the divine, having that kind of finding the sacred places. I mean, I may well have found if I arrived on time to that church building, got through the gate, but there is something about that closed gate stuff that I think a lot of people may experience that just don't know how to actually get across the threshold into the sacred spaces that churches do offer. And maybe don't even want to even try. Maybe they've had experiences like mine, where they found themselves at a closed gate and had a very inhospitable person telling them off for even trying, or, you know, so people will have in their memory an experience of having a closed gate somewhere, which then prevents them from trying to cross over. So I think it means that we just got to get out. We've got to just stop worrying about trying to get people to come in, and certainly take up these opportunities and invitations, like the Celtic Festival, which was certainly a gift to me. But I do wonder whether there's more of those kind of places around in community gatherings, festivals, maybe if local congregations were able to try and join in whatever is going on in their community and see if they can find a place at the table to make an offering. And obviously, Una, who's the coordinator of the Port Arlington Festival, has a very good relationship with those folks in the church, and church has supported the festival over many years. So there's a trust there,
Yeah,
a lot
there's
of
a trust.
trust.
Yeah.
So that but I think another element in it probably, Matt, is that we, you know, what I did in my approach was even in setting up the space wasn't to talk from a Christian point of view straight up, but to really offer an inclusive understanding about spirituality, and even saying things like, you know, spirituality precedes religion. We're all spiritual beings, and religions are a framework, you know, and then saying to people, well, what's your framework? A lot of people don't have a framework or a community to be part of, or they're not quite sure, make it all up. They're in this, David Ranson's written this really interesting article about types of expressions of spirituality in the Australian context. And there are people who are trying to find their own version of spiritual practice by just taking a little bit of everything. So, and classic examples, you know, the waving Buddha on the top of the piano in the living room. You've got your book of oracles, you've got some crystals, you've got your Bible that you got from school. You might have I don't know, some other little thing that you bought in Asia on a holiday. That they're all these sort of religious
Symbolism
that's around, and people going, well, I'm just going to sort it out for myself. So there's a lot of that, and people. So I mean, one of the other people I spoke to at the actually, she came to see me after the festival. One of about 4 people sought me out after this festival, wanting to have ongoing conversation. And one of them, women who came and met with me, talked about her journey. She grew up in an Anglican family, stopped going to Sunday school and into primary school, and just has done all sorts of searching since then, all sorts of things. And a lot in the Buddhist space, but also in a Hindu space, New Agey kind of space. But she kind of felt like the Celtic Christian spiritual stuff resonated for her. She sort of said, this feels like this is actually more my home than anything else I've experienced. So she described a feeling of alignment there, and kind of wanted to know, you know, where could I get more of this? You know, where can I find out more about Christian Celtic spirituality? Oh my goodness. Wasn't quite sure where to send her to.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. This is the thing, right? If we connect with these people and we find these subcultures that exist and so forth, sometimes it's actually up to us to provide the community that they're longing for, because we can't necessarily direct them somewhere else. Yeah. So that's part of the challenge.
Another thing she said is there's a lot of stuff on the internet if you do Google searches, and it's hard to know what's actually good and what's just a bit dodgy. Yeah. So that's another thing that we could be, in terms of the church wanting to offer into this space. We've got to be on the web somewhere with really solid, credible material. And I suppose I feel a little bit of a impulse in myself that I've got to. It's what I got to do next is to find a platform that is the place that, you know, where people are looking on the web for to build a website where these conversations can happen.
Yeah. And the other thing to say too is I think it's up to us. Like, we need to step into the leadership around this sort of thing when we recognize that there is a longing for it, and not kind of point to others and say, well, they're not offering it. You know, we've got to hold the mirror up to ourselves and say, what are we doing about it? which takes it takes courage, right? And it takes time and commitment, but it needs solid, strong leadership if we are going to take our kind of understanding of the Christian tradition, which is fully inclusive and acknowledges colonialism and all those sort of elements, and treats women with the respect that women need to be treated, and all of that sort of stuff. If we're wanting Christianity with those values to be perpetuated into the future within an Australian context, it's actually up to us to actually step into that space. So yeah. But I think it's really interesting that you set out not knowing how many people would come. The workshop before you had 15. There were 70 people who came along to this, deeply engaged. There was a sense of shared experience. So it was a communal thing, but then there were people who actually followed you up afterwards. Like that means that these people were seriously seeking. It wasn't something that was flippant. I need to fill in an hour. This touched them in some ways, and then they wanted to connect with you beyond that, which I think is a really significant thing, because so often we do presentations and then there's nobody who's interested in following up. But so there's still seekers out there. There's still lots and lots of seekers out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And and then it's where do people go when they sense that unrest? And we have such a lot of resources in the Christian tradition to offer to people. I think we just don't quite know how to package them in such a way that people can find them. And it's pretty clear that just sitting inside a church building waiting for folk to turn up is not going to work. No.
Thanks, Joan. Thanks for the ministry that you offer. Thanks for this example that inspires us to be more creative and to think about ways in which we can step beyond what we're doing at the moment and meeting people where they're at in fresh and exciting ways. So thanks for the ministry you offer, and blessings.
Thanks, Matt.